It was a calm morning in Ouagadougou, quiet and still. Heat rising off the asphalt as if time itself was saving energy. But by 10 a.m., that calm shattered. A press advisory from the presidential office announced something that no African nation had ever dared to do. Burkina Faso filed a formal legal complaint to the International Criminal Court, accusing Donald J. Trump, the sitting president of the United States, of preparing an unlawful military intervention against Venezuela. The world froze, radio hosts stammered, embassies scrambled, and on a military base outside Caracas, U.S. Marines paused mid-drill, unsure if their rehearsal had just turned into a global scandal. And yet, Ibrahim Traoré said nothing. No speech, no camera, because the message had already been delivered, through law, courage, and truth from a small nation refusing silence. But the question is, what pushed a landlocked West African country to challenge the most powerful nation on Earth? 3 weeks earlier, while headlines obsessed over lithium prices and tech conferences, Traoré sat in a dim command room beneath the presidential compound. On the screen, drone footage from the Caribbean, 5 U.S. Navy vessels, moving slowly, too slowly. To most, it looked like deterrence. To Traoré, who had studied every dispatch from Libya, every foreign maneuver in the Sahel, it was unmistakable. A preparation phase for a resource seizure. He needed proof. And soon, AES intelligence intercepted encrypted communications off the Florida coast. What they revealed was chilling. Internal memoranda discussing rapid asset neutralization, private military logistics, references to safeguarding multinational claims on mineral outputs. In simple words, they were coming for the oil and the gold beneath it. But what disturbed Traoré most was the silence. No African leader spoke, no Latin bloc protested, not even critics like Tehran or Havana. Fear had replaced outrage. If Venezuela fell quietly, who would be next? Traoré gathered his war cabinet and laid it out plainly. What they do to one of us in silence, they will soon do to all. But he didn't reach for weapons. He reached for law. He ordered 2 things: a legal task force of African and Latin American jurists, and a covert exchange of evidence with Venezuelan intelligence. Within days, satellite data, voice intercepts, and shipping manifests poured in. Among them, a decrypted message from a U.S. defense contractor referencing asset entry clearance on D-Day-1. This was no longer speculation, it was evidence. In an unmarked room beneath the Ministry of Justice, Traoré assembled constitutional lawyers, international jurists, cybersecurity analysts, and former UN rapporteurs. Their mission, to expose not just a plan, but a system. Timing was everything. In 10 days, world leaders would gather at the UN General Assembly. But Traoré wasn't planning a speech. He was planning a strike, a legal one. The complaint would name Donald J. Trump personally responsible for coercive military encroachment on a sovereign state. But the most powerful part was Traoré's handwritten line at the bottom: "Let this be the day the world stops pretending." The next morning, the case was on its way to The Hague. And the world woke up stunned. The ICC confirmed receipt of the filing. The first time in history, an African nation had legally challenged a sitting U.S. president. Western pundits mocked it, but the 62-page document spoke for itself. Satellite overlays, financial agreements predating military movements, internal memos using code phrases like energy stabilization doctrine. But it was Traoré's preamble that ignited the world. "We file this case because silence is complicity, and the time for silence has ended." Students projected the quote onto U.S. embassies. Civil society groups held vigils. In Caracas, crowds waved Burkinabe flags. Still, Traoré stayed silent. His press secretary said, "Truth should echo without needing to be shouted." What happens when the quietest voice becomes the loudest force? Washington erupted. Trump dismissed Burkina Faso as irrelevant. European ministries issued cautious denials. But legal scholars across continents began supporting Traoré's core argument that military presence near a resource zone without UN authorization is coercive aggression. Suddenly, the move was no longer symbolic. It was precedent. Global petitions circulated. International judges spoke out. Small nations requested emergency UN discussions on resource militarization. Burkina Faso had shifted the center of gravity. Inside his country, Traoré published the entire filing online. Villagers and students read it not as distant politics, but as a fight for dignity. When a nation understands the law, who can silence it? Meanwhile, Washington launched a diplomatic counteroffensive. Envoys arrived across Africa. Aid packages were fast-tracked. But Traoré had prepared for this. They will come smiling, he told young diplomats. Behind the smile is the same contract. The ICC had not yet ruled, but the narrative had changed. A poor West African country had used law as a spear. By mid-September, the ripple effects had become global waves. Debates erupted in Berlin. Mock trials took place in São Paulo. African social media carried a single viral phrase: "If Traoré can speak, so can we." Even more surprising, several African nations quietly asked Ouagadougou for help building legal fortifications for their own resource zones. But Traoré refused to be celebrated. "We are not heroes. We are witnesses." Instead of traveling abroad, he doubled down at home, funding legal education, creating an institute for international justice, and translating the Rome Statute into all major Burkinabe languages. He wanted a generation that could fight not with guns but with knowledge. Could this spark a global shift from military power to legal power? Inside the White House, frustration grew. The US didn't fear the ICC's jurisdiction. It feared the moral optics. Global public opinion was turning. Trump lashed out, belittling Burkina Faso on stage. The insult spread worldwide, but instead of humiliation, it awakened a deeper truth. The West still believed it defined seriousness. Traoré proved otherwise. Then came the moment that changed everything. On September 23rd, he released a one-page open letter, not to America, not to presidents, but to the people of the world. "We do not hate America. We fear silence. Let the powerless remember they are not voiceless." The message exploded globally. Fishermen in the Philippines held vigils. Farmers in Bolivia read the letter in schools. South African miners sent a message of solidarity stamped with thumbprints. Inside the ICC, an independent review panel was formed, the first of its kind, to evaluate whether the claims merited fast-track investigation. A small African nation had forced institutional action against a US president. Washington retaliated with aid cuts and media attacks. Traoré responded by visiting schools, hospitals, and cultural centers, teaching people how international law works. Quietly, relentlessly, he turned law into a weapon for the poor. He became the first African leader to legally challenge a sitting American president. But his true legacy was awakening a new consciousness, one where nations long dismissed as developing began defining their own terms of dignity. Today, in Burkina Faso, children learn international law alongside history. Farmers debate the Rome Statute beside rainfall patterns. A dusty, landlocked nation has become the center of a global reawakening. Traoré didn't rewrite history. He reminded us that history is written by those who refuse to be erased. And when future generations ask what changed that year, the answer will be simple. A man from Burkina Faso filed a document, and the world was forced to listen. This chapter closes, but the story continues. If you enjoyed this breakdown, hit like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more.